It is at this time that I ask, would you please turn all your mobile phones to silent? And I am also required to remind you that we are living in interesting times. As everyone's fully aware, we do need to social distance, and so if you could do that, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
What gorgeous flowers. Look, for the Aussie soldier, you got the most beautiful bunch of collection of Australian flowers. At least half must be wildlife. It's just beautiful. It really is. And I'd like to welcome you here today and to remember the amazing life of Mervyn Paxinos. And I know that he would like me to welcome his family. And so I do welcome the family, and they would also like to extend their welcome to you. And also they have some relatives and friends who are joining in through live stream. Now, some have been texting me and they're very happy that you've been able to let them share in the service today. And so joining us, and a special welcome from the family to Graham and John, and Auntie Val Paxinos, and cousin Shirley. I can tell you from my texting that the Enterman clan is watching. And they're saying hello to their cousins. And I didn't know that Sandra was the baby of the baby, and I picked the wrong line of cousins. So cousin Brenda and sisters and brother. Jodie, Katrina, Laura, Andrew, Jessica, Ben, Jamie, Mary, Phil, Olivia and others. I know that the family who are present are appreciative that you've taken time and interest and just sharing in this time with them, even though it's a little bit difficult to travel through conditions and also through distance. And on the back of the today's brochure, I rapidly became aware that I could never remember such a large clan. And I usually write furious notes, and so we've printed the names on the back. And it's the family of Mervyn and Joy. And this is a clan. And I remember being in Israel, being tremendously moved when they read the name of everybody that had, one by one through the decades, everybody that has passed away. And I thought we'd read the names of the clan of Mervyn and Joy today. So just turn to the back and this is big. Deronda and Brenda, Ken, Leander, the children of Mervyn and Joy. What joy! Grandchildren, Jodie, Katrina, Jason, Heidi, Tony, Laura, Andrew, Tim, Harriet, Jessica, Ben and Meredith. And partners. The list became too big it just extends. Great-grandchildren, some of whom are here today as well, some who are listening. Jasmine, Ben, Madison, Bailey, Darcy, Lydia, Roy, Ashen, Kobe, Abraham, Alexandria, Sophia, Zara, Indy, Colton, Stanley, and there are two more on the way. And Mervyn and Joy, that's a biblical clan. And so on behalf of Mervyn and Joy, I welcome his family, and they have welcomed you. And to the family who are watching through the live stream, you are welcome as much a part of this service as we are today. And later, Ken Bird, who was the pastor of Mudgee to Brenda and David, has organised to do the live stream, and he is able to help you interact. If you'd like to go and say hello to those who are watching at some point, then not today. Okay, it's a live stream going one way. Okay, but you're welcome. We're going to open our service, a memorial service today, and I'm going to say a prayer. Dear Lord, you gave life to Mervyn and Joy. And God, then you gave them free will, free choice. And he gave every human on this planet the same choices. And man, that gets a bit complicated sometimes. But Mervyn and Joy, they chose each other, and they have the most beautiful clan today. And grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And Lord, we just want to let you know, we know that you're already here, but we want you to know you are so welcome. Thank you so much for the gift of life. Thank you for so much for the gift of choice. That's hurt us sometimes from war, things that happen against us. We don't always make the best choices, but we smile. Mervyn's smile is just legendary. And his Christian, we know he knew he was saved, and he knew that you loved him. And Lord, I just pray today that you would bless us with your increased presence. Amen. Mervyn Paxinos was a member at Charlestown Church for quite some time. And so quite a few members of the Charlestown Church are here today as well. And when it goes back in time, I'm thinking, wow, he must have been there when I was there. He was. And but when I was a college student, I guess Anyway, and I've ended up being pastor at Mudgee Church, where I know Brenda and David, of course, and their clan. But it's a real privilege, and it feels like I've turned a circle to think that I've come back to represent not just the family of Mervyn, but to think that I was once, for just a short period of time, associate pastor with Keith Jackson at Charlestown Church. I found this very moving. And I had no idea that Brenda knew Francine, but now it makes sense. Okay. And Francine Bell, accompanied by David Potter, is singing a very favourite hymn of so many of us, Until Then.
Good morning, everyone. I want you to turn to your right, and I want you to say, until then, to the person next to you.
Well, you want more right? Until then.
Until then. I want you to turn to the person on your left and say, until then. Hallelujah. Merv was one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, and I'm sure the members of his family know that. And I feel very privileged to be here today. I don't know that my voice will be, but I feel very happy to be here today to celebrate the life of a man who was just oh so special to so many of us. And he knew, Merv knew, that he was just a visitor here. And so are we all. And I live for the day, until then, that we can see him again and hug him again, hug Joy again, and that we'll all be together worshiping our Lord. Can I have an amen on that? The wonderful David Potter has consented to accompany me today, and I'd like to thank you for that, please. And you all know this song, so you can sing too. My heart can sing when I pause to remember a heartache here is but a stepping stone along a trail that's winding always upward. This troubled world is not my final home. Come on, sing it with me. But until then, my heart, don't sing. Go on singing. Until then, hum. This joy will carry on. Until the day my eyes behold the city. Until the day God that cause a heart to tremble, remembered there, will only bring a smile. But until then, my heart will go on singing. Until then, with joy I'll carry on. Until the day my eyes behold the city. Until the day God calls me home. Rest in peace, beautiful Merv. I loved you.
I've always listened closely to this psalm at so many different funerals, and I have really truly pondered its deep meaning. And I have always wished that goodness and mercy would go ahead of me all the days of my life. But it says in the psalm that goodness and mercy will follow. And goodness and mercy will be following Merv because of God's love. And he will one day see Jesus in heaven by God's grace. To read us this beautiful psalm, his daughter Rhonda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to read this from the King James Version because I know that's the version that Dad had when he was younger. It's the version he learnt this psalm from, and it's the way he would remember it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.
Daughters Brenda and Leander will be reading the eulogy for their father.
Today we're here to remember the life of our dear Dad. He was born on the 20th of the 9th, 1923, and he made it to the 27th of the 12th, 2020. It was always Dad's wish to live to be 100. I know when he moved into the nursing home, he said, oh, I can't believe I've only got 3 more years to live. And one of the books we found beside his chair when we were cleaning up his house was How to Live to 100 and Enjoy It. And that was the topic of a lot of his books. Well, Dad was born in Melbourne. His parents were Rita and Stas Paxinos. His early years were hard times. His parents had to work separate jobs, so he was often mostly brought up by his maternal grandmother and a maiden aunt who lived with the grandmother. It was a hard life, and he lacked a lot of affection growing up. His dad, being a Greek, worked at the fruit and vegetable markets. He would get up at 4 o'clock and he'd go and help his dad pack the vegetables and do the deliveries, and then he would go off to school. From the age of 12 to 14, he lived with his mum up at Omeo in the mountains. They had rooms at the Blue Duck Inn, and his mum taught school there. It was a happy time of his life, more carefree. He learnt to ride horses and he learnt to fish, and it was an enjoyable time of his life. He remembers that the blanket on his bed was made of all rabbit skins. They were sewn together and it was really cosy and warm. The Great Depression started, and at the age of 14 he returned to Melbourne and he got a job in a gate and chain wire factory, and all the wages that he made went to the family to support them at that time.
Now we move on to the war years. Dad was only 18 when World War II broke out, and he joined the infantry battalion. He was issued clothing and boots and asked to come back the next day. They were marched all the way from Melbourne to Sydney, so can you imagine it? It's a long way, and he talked about the blisters and how hard it was. When they got there, they were put in the horse stables at the showground, and they were fed the loaves of bread that were tossed into them, and Dad always said the greedy ones ate well. This was followed by 12 months jungle training in the Queensland rainforests before being posted overseas. They landed in Port Moresby by boat. While in New Guinea, he transferred to a New Guinea regiment and worked with the American 112th Cavalry. Dad attained the rank of sergeant. Towards the end of the war, he went to New Britain and landed at Cape Gloucester. The Japanese were at Rabaul at the other end of the island. A Japanese boat drifted from Rabaul and ended up near where they were camped. They thought it would be booby-trapped, but on checking it out, it had just broken from its mooring. Japanese boats were easily identified because they were made of wood. Being young and adventurous, they decided to take it out on the bay for a joyride. Just as they got into the middle of the bay, an American plane went over and started firing. The bullets were actually leaping across the water toward them. The bullets skipped across the water toward them and stopped just short of the boat as they furiously waved their uniforms in the air. They took the surrender of the Japs at Rabaul. They were all lined up at the pier and were formed into groups and had to restore bomb holes and repair electrical wiring and other jobs. All up, Dad was 4 years in New Guinea. He saw the horrors of war and says he doesn't know how he survived it. It had a profound effect on him for the rest of his life.
While he was in New Guinea, Dad, he'd never had any introduction to religion at all in his growing up years. On the march from Melbourne to Sydney, on Sundays, they had church. And if they didn't go to church, they were given hard labour jobs to do. So he decided he'd go to church. And he clearly remembered that first introduction to church. Well, when he was in New Guinea, he met another man, Bronte Sinclair. Some of you may know Bronte. And they became lifelong friends. Bronte sort of encouraged him to study a bit and learn a bit about Adventism. And it was actually when they came back from the war, it was Bronte who introduced Dad to Mum at Warburton in Victoria. And from there, love blossomed, and they were married on the 29th of January in 1950. After they were married, Bronte convinced Dad that it would be a good thing if he went and studied at Avondale. Dad said it took an awful lot of convincing, but he did want to learn a little more about the Adventist faith, so he went. actually studied ministry but didn't finish the course. I think a few too many children came along, and so he worked at the Wangi Power Station for a few years, and he then did a nursing course at Cessnock District Hospital. As young children, we lived in Cessnock and started school in Cessnock, and we were there for quite a few years.
And I was born there.
Yes, you were born there. I have the honour of being born at Kurri Kurri. He ran the Abernethy Old People's Home for a couple of years, and from there he went to Newcastle and did a psychiatric nursing course at Watt Street. One of his jokes used to be, he'd say to us kids, "What street does Dad work at?" He'd say, "What street?" And he'd say, "What street?" He finished his working life as a welfare officer at a community health centre, and he retired at the age.
Even though we started out at Cessnock, we spent most of our childhood in the home that Dad grew to love dearly in Albert Street. At the time when we moved there wasn't very many houses there, and we lived at the bottom of a dirt road. And we pretty well had a wonderful childhood because we could run wild in the bush, and that's where we started our great love of nature. We used to call it Wonderland. There were so many birds there, and we'd go off at the start of the day and explore, and there was a cave, and yes, so it was a wonderful place to grow up. Dad was always a fix-it man, so there was often a trip to the tip, and he fixed up our made us billy carts, which we used to run down the dirt road into the grassy gutter. And there was bikes and dolls' prams, so he was always very handy. And later in life he had his man cave he built out the back, and he used to do a lot of woodwork that he enjoyed, and David will attest that that shed had every tool you could ever imagine in it. He collected quite a few different tools. So the bush was our playground, and we used to go around, and there was a few characters living. I was friends with a girl down the road at the Joneses, and Mum and Dad would have been horrified. I was about 5, and I used to go down there and they taught me how to play cards, and we'd all sit around and play poker. So they never knew that, sorry Dad. There was the sort of place where they had pet possums and, you know, and cooked in a fire in a big sort of oven on the wall sort of thing. Yeah, so it was an interesting childhood. So apparently Dad in his younger life enjoyed Sea Scouts, tennis and boxing and golf. We chuckle sometimes because that was all before our time. Yeah. Okay. Dad loved buying books, so if anybody's been to our house, they would know there was a whole wall of bookcases that Dad built. But he loved buying books, but they had to be on special. And it always annoyed me that he left the stickers there quite proudly, showing like that it cost $1 every book. But he loved books on health and how to live a long life. So there's something to be said for his extensive library and living to 97. And it's where my love of books started too, as I've ended up being a librarian. He was always very healthy, and I know all of we children can remember some of his terrible concoctions he used to drink in the mornings, fish oil mixed with brewer's yeast and kelp and all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and there was a few times the lid wasn't put on the blender properly. A few episodes, but Dad was always very health conscious and a good example for us to live a healthy life as well. Yeah. So, as you know, Mum and Dad were foundation members of Charlestown Church, and Dad was always active in the church, taking lessons and the occasional sermon. Now we have to come to the sad part, that Dad and we children had to bear the terrible tragedy of losing our mum. Yeah, tragically, Mum lost her life in a car accident in December 1997. But the positive side of that is that all we children have got to know our Dad a lot better, because we made more effort to make regular trips and stay with him and check up on him, and we all got to know him over the years. So that was the positive side. Dad was also predeceased by his sister Peggy in November 2017. He is survived by we 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 16 great-grandchildren, and also by his 2 half-brothers, Graham and John, and by his stepmum, Auntie Val Paxinos.
We chuckle that at the age of 97 he still has a living stepmum. He lived at Tingara Heights since the early 1960s. Due to excellent nursing care from Hunter Nursing and Uniting Care, he was able to stay in his own home until December 2019, when a bad fall and frequent blackouts that he was having meant that he was no longer safe to live at home on his own. Dad was stubborn, and the neighbours will attest to that. He would never recognise that he still couldn't do things, and one of those was driving his jolly car. And we even went as far as to go to the doctor's surgery and say, please don't give him his licence. He has no feeling in his feet, he can't walk, he is not fit to drive. But Dad would smile at the doctor in his charming way, say, I'm fine, and the doctor would give him his licence. The irony of it was, he rode off his car at the doctor's surgery. He went through a fence and took out a tree. We were mightily grateful that nobody was hurt. We were terrified that he would hurt somebody in their prime of life in those final years. But that ended his driving. Dad had excellent neighbours. Kevin and Anne, Des and Gay. Des rang this morning, they couldn't be here, but Kevin and Anne are here, and from the bottom of our hearts we thank you. You always went above and beyond with helping Dad and being there for him, bringing him meals, taking him places, picking us up from the airport, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You're the best neighbours. And would you believe that from when I was a little girl, the same neighbours live on each side of Dad? Yeah. For the past 12 years, Dad had a constant companion in his little dog, Jip. He said to us one day, I want you to get me a dog. He said, I want a Jack Russell and I don't want you to pay anything for it. In Mudgee one day, we saw advertised Jack Russell cross puppies and they were $100, but we didn't tell Dad that we'd paid money. And Jip came to live with Dad. Well, the bond those two had was unbelievable. And that was the biggest issue in Dad going into care, was that he couldn't have little Jip with him. He kept saying to me, you have to find me a nursing home where I can have Jip. But at his level of care, that just wasn't possible. But at least where he was, Jip was allowed to come in and visit. Jip had the nursing staff all worked out, and the tea lady, he'd welcome the tea lady and he'd get his own cake and biscuits. And he found that if they put a biscuit on the floor, if he ignored it, they'd think he wanted another one, so they'd give him another one, then he'd go back and eat them both. But Dad moved into the Opal nursing home up in Mudgee because family has spread, the rest were interstate, and he needed family near him to look after things. So it was very hard for him, extremely hard to leave his home and his friends. It was hard, very hard, but that was the way it had to be. But he settled into the nursing home, not too bad. He became a favourite of the nurses. They used to tell me that they'd ask him to do something and he'd look at them and say, "Yes, matron." And as his health deteriorated, his mobility really deteriorated. He ended up in a wheelchair. And COVID hit, which made it really hard because at times the nursing home was closed completely. Trips out in the car were banned, but we were allowed to walk the streets with the wheelchair. So we'd put Dad in the wheelchair, Jip would sit on his knee, and we'd go around the streets to a little park that was close by, and we'd throw the ball for Jip, and he'd drink his Dare iced coffee, which he hung out for every time we went in. And that was the only outings he had, apart from a short spin in Rhonda and Steve's new car the last time they came up. Mentally, he was pretty good right up to the end. He did start to, often when people lose their mind a bit, they tell you the same thing over and over. With Dad, it was different. Dad went on all these amazing trips. I'd go in and he'd say, "I've spent the afternoon on the ocean." I'd say, "Well, that's a good way to spend the day, Dad." And another time I'd go in and he'd say, "How did you find me?" And I'd say, "Where are you, Dad?" And he'd say, "I'm up the north coast. I'm wondering how I'm going to pay for my room." Another time he was at the university. Another time he was travelling on a train in America. And he wondered why they offered him a pee bottle on the train. But in the end, it was time. Dad had had enough. He has peace in death. We'll miss him, but he's peaceful. And next thing he knows, he'll be reunited with Mum, and that will be fantastic. And Jesus. Thank you.
I just prepared a presentation, and it's in Dad's own words, and we're going to play it for you. This is Dad's reflection on his life.
My name is Mervyn Paxinos, and I was born in Victoria. I was brought up mostly by my grandmother, who lived in South Melbourne. And we were in poor circumstances. We used to walk to school, which was 1.5 kilometres away, and we had no shoes on. We wore bare feet, and we lived a very simple life. My mother and I moved up to Omeo in the Snowy Mountains, where my mother taught us the school at the back of the place we were staying at, which was called the Blue Duck Inn. And we were just a group of small children, and we were about, I'd say about 10 of us at the most. And Mum taught us the elements of education there, and we had a great life up there where we used to fish. We had the river running by our hotel, and we used to go hunting, and there was lots of wildlife up there, and we lived a pretty great outdoor life. After some years we returned back to Melbourne, and I then joined the Sea Scouts, and that was a great experience. We used to take a boat out, a rowing boat out, and we would be rowing while the master would be reclining back in steering the boat. And we were exhausted by the end of the time we were out, and sometimes we'd be let off the boat for some reason and had to walk all the way around the lake back again to the headquarters. But they were good days, and we used to sleep overnight there somewhere in the shed that we occupied. But it brought back a lot of fond memories when I think of that. At 14 years of age, we were desperately in need of income, and I got a job in a chain wire factory, and I used to work a machine there putting out the chain wire, and that was close to home fortunately, and I would walk there and back each day, and I stayed in that job until I turned 18 when the war had broken out, and I then joined the army. And I remember lining up with a cut lunch as I was told to bring in a line, and he gave us a talk about what to expect, which wasn't very nice, about things that happen and that could happen to you. And we then went on a route march to Sydney. It took us about over a week, I think, doing about 20k a day, and we slept in the paddocks as we went, and a lot of us ended up with blisters, as you would expect, and they had an ambulance following us, fortunately, who would treat us each evening when we stopped. And we finally got to Sydney, and we were put into the showground, and we were in the stables, the horse stables. We were in the horse stables, and they were throwing a bale of straw for each of us to sleep on. And when it was lunchtime, they'd throw a loaf of bread into the shed, into this where we were, and whoever got it first got the biggest chunk out of it. And that's how we existed for a long while. And from there we went on to Queensland jungle, so we knew where we were going, and we embarked for New Guinea on a ship called the Edina, a troop ship, and they had the makeshift beds 4 high where you clamber up to the top and sleep there. And we landed at Port Moresby, and from there we marched 20k to Balolo, which is a gold mining town quite close, and there we put up and began training in jungle training. And we were there for a few months, and then we moved further inland to Wau, and we then started our actual patrols in the jungle. We went over to New Britain, which is an island off New Guinea coast, and there we had many experiences that I can remember a few of them, and how we one incident when we were on patrol, we came across a boat, a landing boat that had floated down from Rabaul, which was then the city of the main city of New Guinea, and was occupied by the Japanese. And we boarded this boat to go for a little drive around the lake, and as we were going around fairly well out to sea, an American fighter plane came around the corner and saw the Japanese boat, landing boat, and started to fire, and I can still see those spurts of water as the bullets loaded came closer and closer. We were waving frantically, and just before it hit the boat, he stopped. So we made it hot shots for the land, and when we landed, we went to the American base, which was just the next door to us, American Air Base, and explained that would they please stop shooting at our troops, and we were going to paint the Australian flag on the side of the barge, which we did. Yeah, so I was in New Britain when the war ended, and we took the surrender at Rabaul, and we were a flotilla of small boats, and there were 95,000 Japanese there, all in parole, lined up, and when we landed, the commanding officer of the Japanese gave an order, and they sprung to attention, and we landed, and then we took over, and each of us was given several Japanese to help clear up the bomb holes and the telephone poles and all the rest of it that had to be done. So I was in charge of a Japanese squad for a while, which sounds a bit unusual, and then after that it was home sweet home.
I met Merv for the first time that I remember and recall at Mudgee at the nursing home, and when he first went there, and when I was going I would visit on a Wednesday, and I'd take 91-year-old Les, and they became quite great friends. And it is absolutely true that when Mervyn was first at the nursing home, he caused a little bit of grief to Brenda, blaming her, no one else, numerous times for having shackled him in this prison. But Les was great, and Les and Merv would discuss escape plans. And Les has lost his memory a little bit, and I just remember Merv had not lost his memory at that time, and Merv had this extraordinary Christian graciousness, and he would listen to Les's long stories about where the best caves are, and then as Mervyn's condition worsened, they'd be escaping together. Les knew where they would go, and so I found it one of the more peaceful and relaxing visits. Once I went off to sleep because they were just talking so much, and they woke me up and told me off in a mild way. The sad one was that it was in the middle of the COVID, and things became a bit harder to organise visits, and I was allowed in, and Les wasn't, and Merv couldn't really walk at all, but that day he staggered up onto his walker, and it took us about 5 minutes or so. He walked, not a block, but a couple of rooms in the nursing home, and there they communicated through the glass. And I'd heard of that because of other church members and other experiences in your area as well. It was just one of those sadder thoughts. And then Les became able to visit again. But amazing man. It's not really much I can add. And what I wanted to share with you was that God was with Merv all of his times. And sometimes people that experience great trauma, as you know, are able to be so pleasant and able to communicate so well and be the most amazing ambassador, and they let their guard down with those they love the most, and it gets a little bit hard sometimes. And there's a time and a place for everything, and God knows these times and these places, and this side of heaven. For everything there is a season. There is a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and yes, Mervyn, there's a time to die, a time to plant, there is a time to harvest and pick up what you planted. God says that there is a time to kill. There is war on earth, and there's also time to heal. And apparently, it takes a long time. There is a time to break down. There's also time to build up. There's a time to weep. There's also times to laugh. There's a time to mourn, and there is a time to dance. There's also a time to cast away stones. In the old lands, the stones were either a memorial stone of an agreement between folks, or they were a precious stone that you carried. It was a memorial of some description. There's a time to cast away those. There's a time to make new ones and gather new stones together. There's a time to embrace, and there's a time not to embrace. There's a time to seek, there's a time to lose, a time to keep. There's also a time to cast away, a time to tear apart. There's a time to sow. There's a time to keep quiet. There's a time to speak. Who would have ever thought there is a time to love? We understand that, that's easy. There's also a time to hate. There's a time for war. I guess there's not so much love there, and it affects love for the rest of our life. But there's also a time for peace. Well, what do we get? If you know all about the times and you're very wise, what have you got at the end of the day? King Solomon continues in chapter 3 and 4 and says, doesn't matter whether you're wise about your times or not, you're still going to die. Because the end for all is exactly the same. It's said in Ecclesiastes 3 in verse number 11, it's God who put the spark of eternity in every human heart to convince us there's something that lies beyond. And yet, it says God hid the beginning and the ultimate end from every human. We can't see through and beyond eternity by God's plan. And then it concludes in that whole series of thoughts in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, the first few verses, where King Solomon then puts his conclusion for a whole matter. And he says, and Mervyn did this, and I saw the real ambassador side of Mervyn. I saw the memory loss side of Mervyn. I never saw the family side of Mervyn. I only saw a perfect Mervyn. An ambassador for God, knew about salvation by grace, listening to dear 91-year-old Les and smiling his way through a retirement home while planning an escape. My response to him was, if you haven't given them the power of eternity, it's your decision, mate. Do what you want. That's because I knew he wasn't getting out the door, so I wasn't causing trouble. But, there's times at the very end it says something that Mervyn would definitely agree with. Remember that God is in heaven and that you are on earth. There's something big and beyond, and it's absolutely beautiful. We have got some pictures that just tell the story of Mervyn. we're going to take the final walk with Merv together. And there we will commit him to God's care right next to dear Joy.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That does conclude the service here in the chapel this morning. As mentioned, we are just about to walk Merv out to his final resting place. And it is at this time that I ask those that have been appointed pallbearers, would you please come forward?